Welcome into Bucs Insider, coming to you from the Bucs studio, presented by Ticketmaster. Casey Phillips here with Scott Smith and Bri Dix. And Scott and I are back from the owners' meetings. And as always, there's some new rules and things that they consider. We went over last week what we felt like were some of the ones that we were intrigued by, what we thought might pass, what not. And so now we do have the answers on most of it. So let's start with that kickoff rule. That, of course, that was the big one last year. There was still a little adjustment again to it this year.
Yeah, I think they liked the dynamic kickoff, as they call it. It definitely reduced injuries on the play, so they were trying to reconstruct the kickoff so that they could get it back into the game, but not have it be the most dangerous play in the game. So you know how you have them lined up 5 yards from each other, and so they don't get this big running start.
Yeah.
That was the problem. You got these guys sprinting down the field 30 yards and then smashing into each other. So that's still the same. The big change this year that they made to it, in my opinion, and I don't like it, and I voiced my objections last week, is the kickoff now comes out to the 35.
Yeah.
Now I know the point is to not have as many kickoffs. That's the point. But their goal is to get it up to like 50 to 60% of kickoffs are returned, which is great. And if they succeed in that, great. But that still means 40 to 50% of them are touchbacks.
Yep.
And you're giving the ball at the 35.
Such an advantage.
You hit one like 20-yard passing play, you're already in field goal range.
Yeah.
It happened to us against Dallas last year
Yep.
because all these kickers can make it from 58 yards without any trouble whatsoever. So I just think they're making it too easy to score. I mean, if you think back to it, it wasn't that long ago when the kickoff touchback was the 20-yard line.
Yeah.
Now, I know it's happened incrementally, but to get to the 35?
It's a huge difference.
It's huge. It totally fundamentally has changed the game, and I'm not a fan.
Yep, I think I agree with that. Yep, but the good news is, one that we are big fans of did pass. The overtime rules.
Yes.
Tell me, Bri, tell me what stands out to you about this new rule.
So both teams will have the option to possess the ball in overtime. We've all witnessed those Bills-Chiefs games, and it's like
Bucs-Chiefs games.
Yes, and Chiefs
Yes.
would consistently get the call, and then it's just like, and then you know it's over from there. But I think I like the fact that both teams are going to get to have a shot, and I mean, I think there's been so many games where you just wish that was the case, and probably the outcome would have gone a lot differently. And I just think it's more fair and more objective with both teams getting a shot
more fun
to show. Yeah.
I love it.
I agree with all that, but let me ask you a question. If you're the coach and you win the coin flip, do you take the ball or not?
So, I mean, personally, I think that I still might, but I think it probably is a lot like how you feel even taking the coin flip in the game of like which one you're wanting to do.
Mm-hmm.
If you
like
probably
what are you more comfortable?
You've probably seen at
in?
least one or two college football overtimes, right?
Yep.
And it's not the exact same thing. It's not crucially, it's not timed, but the team that wins the coin toss to start overtime always chooses to go on offense second.
Yep.
And the reason is
Yeah,
obvious.
so
you
can
know
see
what
3
you
versus
need.
7, yeah.
Yeah.
So if the other team here in the NFL gets the ball first to start overtime, they drive down and get a touchdown, well then you have the ball now. Let's say you hit 3rd and 17 at the other team's 30. Well, if you didn't know, if you had the ball first, you'd probably just kick a field goal there because you got to get something. But if you know you have to have a touchdown, then you're going for it, and you're going for it on every fourth down.
Advantage,
you know exactly what you need, and you know if they didn't score at all, then you know you don't have to risk it on 3rd and 17. You just kick the field goal.
Yep.
The flip side of that is they amended this rule before they approved it because the original it was proposed by Philadelphia, and the original rule had it exactly mirror what it is in the postseason, which is both teams get the ball and it's 15 minutes long.
Yeah, so that's interesting because what if you don't get the ball till the last?
Right.
That's the threat of not taking it first. They take 8 minutes to score a touchdown. Right. Now your back's against the wall. So to me, if it was 15 minutes, I think it's a no-brainer. You take the ball second.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you could go either way. Maybe it depends on situations. Like your defense has been doing great all game.
Right.
You know, maybe this one went to overtime at 7-7, and the defense has been dominating. Maybe then you feel comfortable that your defense will get off the field and maybe even stop them from scoring. But I think it adds another layer of strategy, and I like that.
I do too. I think that's going to be very fun. All right, and then next we have the expansion of the replay assistant capabilities. So what did this mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all do. Do we all feel like the replay assistant, which has been ramping up the last couple of years, has worked pretty well? I mean, they tend to get it right and they tend to do it quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all we want, right?
Yep.
So to expand the number of things that it can cover, like face mask and roughing the passer and so on, that's good. However, I think my biggest complaint about that not being used for everything last year was the Bucky Irving lack of a face mask call in Atlanta,
yes.
where if they call that face mask penalty, I think the Buccaneers probably win that game. But instead, they settled for a field goal and gave Atlanta enough time on the clock to tie the game at the very end, right? The problem is this rule only covers plays where a flag is thrown. So they're not going to, they wouldn't have fixed that play because no flag was thrown.
Yeah.
I would have liked to have seen this play
Where you could fix it even if it wasn't.
Fix it either way. Yeah.
I agree with that. All right, a couple quick ones we won't get into very long, but now you can do one Zoom interview with up to 5 players during the legal tampering period. We kind of talked about that last week. We feel like that's just
It's common sense.
Common sense,
Yeah.
easy. The tush-push ban has been tabled. That's the thing about owners' meetings. It doesn't mean anything that's proposed either passes or fails. Sometimes they table it. This one they've tabled. So we continue to wonder what is going to happen with this one.
Yeah, instead of saying no, they said, okay, let's push the discussion to when we get together again in May, which tells me that behind the scenes, they still want to do something about this, but they don't think this was the exact right solution. And now you're hearing rumblings, I think even from the commissioner, that the potential solution may be just to completely ban pushing and pulling ball carriers.
Yeah, which
used to be the rule, by the way.
Yeah, that's what I say. That
So
feels.
it's not crazy.
And I get it. I've always understood the idea of like it feeling more like a rugby play than a football play, but I don't like the idea of banning it just because teams have struggled to stop it. Like if there is a player safety side, you know.
That's what everybody always says,
Right.
but I don't think there's ever been an injury on that play.
Right.
I don't think Jason Kelsey loved how it felt.
Yeah.
But not many teams have a dominant offensive line and a quarterback that can squat 600 pounds.
Yeah, that's outrageous.
So that's why they're so good.
That's why they're irritated about it. And then finally, the automatic first down on defensive holding did not.
I knew it. I said it
yep.
last week, right? It wasn't going to pass.
No, but we're still disappointed.
We talked about this a little bit before we started here.
Right.
And I'm not going to take credit for this because I heard it on a different podcast. But why not make defensive holding 10 yards and no automatic first down? Offensive holding is 10 yards.
Yep.
So that to me takes out the overly punitive part of it and doesn't force the unintended consequence of
3rd and 15.
Yeah, and coaches coaching their players to hold more often because there's no automatic first down. If it's 3rd and 7, you commit defensive holding, you get 10 yards of first down. That seems fair.
Yep, I
If
agree
it's
with that.
3rd and 15, now it's 3rd and 5. That also seems fair.
When you're king for a day, that will be your
Okay.
first
Yes.
edict
All right, yeah.
you will issue. All right, so we had a Stump Scott question get submitted.
I need to get back on track here.
Yeah. What's your batting percentage?
Well, I know
at
I
this
got
point?
the first 2 right?
Yep.
And I got the
And then you
third
got like
one.
a
I didn't.
half.
I
You
got
got
the
part of
Simeon
it.
Rice one. I was there, but I didn't quite
Yeah.
get it. And then the last one I didn't get at all.
Didn't get,
That was
so-
one about Nebraska.
All right, so I feel like this feels like one you'll know.
So it's stat based.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which Bucs rookie tight end holds the record for the most receptions in their rookie season?
That's
We
easy.
have a
See, yeah,
smile.
look at his face.
He knows.
Look at the look on his
Yeah,
face.
that one's easy. That was Tim Wright in 2013.
Do you remember the exact number?
No,
That's not part of the question.
50 something. I don't remember the exact number. Cade had 42, by the way. So he
Which
got
also
close.
shows how amazing, because that was a lot for Cade as a rookie, and that you're correct. That Tim Wright, it was 54.
Okay, and he was actually a converted wide receiver from Rutgers. So Greg Schiano knew him. And the funny little side note on Tim Wright is that the Buccaneers traded him away twice in the span of 12 months.
Man,
Wow.
Traded him in 14, I think, to the
I start
Patriots.
to take that personally.
It's traded him to the Patriots for Logan Mankins. I think there was a draft pick involved too.
Oh, yeah.
And then I don't remember how he got him back, but then a year later we traded him right before the start of the regular season to Detroit for kicker Kyle Brenza. Do you remember Kyle Brenza?
Yeah.
Like he could kick the ball a mile, but he went like 2 for 6,
Yep.
and then we cut him.
That's crazy. Well, yes, we did not stump Scott, but thank you for that question. Your batting percentage went up just a little bit there. So please continue to send those to myself or to Bri. Again, we are relying on all of you to help us stump
Yes,
Scott. But
we
that was
need
a
to
good
do
one.
it.
I enjoyed it. Okay, let's. The other things that come out of the owners' meetings are we get a chance to hear from GMs and head coaches. So both Jason Light and Todd Bowles spoke to the media. So tell me, especially starting with Jason Light. I know that with the draft coming, one of the few opportunities to really hear from him. It's always an exciting time to kind of gauge what he's thinking about some things. So, of course, we always want to ask, trading up, down in the draft, are any of these things possibilities? And he did speak on that a little bit.
Yeah, and if you look back at his track record, he's only traded up in the first round one time, and that was the Tristan Wirfs year, and it was one spot.
Yep.
He's been more likely, like the Logan Hall year, the Vita Vea year, he's been more likely to trade back. And I liked his answer to this question if that was on the plate, and he seemed kind of enthusiastic to me about it. I think that is very much within the realm of possibility that at 19, there's maybe you had 2 or 3 guys that you would have stayed put for at 19, but they're all gone. And now you have another group of guys that you're fine with any of them, so you can move back 5, 10 spots.
Right.
Like I'll give you a scenario. Maybe we like Jihad Campbell. Maybe we think the 2 best cornerbacks are Will Johnson and Jahdae Barron, but they're both gone. And then you like a lot of cornerbacks after that, like Maxwell Hairston or Benjamin Morrison or something. You can move backwards and feel good about getting one of those.
Yeah,
So,
that's interesting.
I think it's a very, very possible scenario this year.
Yeah.
And then also the other thing that I took from what Jason was talking about was the team's really high on Servassier Dennis.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree with that. And I thought both he and Bowles talked a lot about that, which was interesting. And it has to be exciting for Bucs fans to hear when, especially, we do know we have Levante David back, which is great, but outside of that, that position has been kind of in flux and up in the air this offseason. To know they feel good about him. And I feel like they especially talked about, I think it was Bowles who said that he's not just that third down guy.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, and I thought that was a great point to show that I think that's how a lot of us have been thinking about him and talking about it. And I think it was largely, especially because we talked about, maybe KJ Britt and him platoon a bit. But it's great to hear that they don't view him that way, that they do view him as someone who could stand in there, he and Levante all the time, which is a big deal.
And they also have Anthony Walker, who they're high on as well. So there's a little bit of competition there.
Yes.
And competition's good.
Competition is always good. Well, I know something else Jason talked about was, of course, Hassan Reddick, one of the big additions this offseason that wasn't a current guy. We re-signed so many of our own guys. That was one of the new people that wasn't part of our roster this last year. So tell me, for you, Bri, what stood out about what he said about him and just what we know at this point about the expectations.
Well, when asked if getting Hassan Reddick would change the mindset, I really liked what Jason said in that gives them the freedom to choose the best player available. They don't feel pigeonholed. Like, getting Hassan Reddick was great, but that's not necessarily going to stop them from taking an edge in the first round. And if you have a guy that falls that they feel really good about, that's on their board, they can take him, because you have the depth. You added Hassan Reddick, you brought back Anthony Nelson, so now it isn't like you're going in there and you're thinking you have to get an edge, because when you press, that's when mistakes can happen, but now they have the freedom to choose whoever's the top in their mind, whether that's the corner or linebacker, whoever.
Yeah, it doesn't keep them from doing it.
I feel like we often, when we discuss this position, forget to mention Chris Braswell. I mean, think about the fact that he was a second-round pick last year. They obviously like him quite a bit, and I think he was coming on a little bit at the end of the year. So there's a possibility that you already feel really good about your rotation of Yaya, Hassan Reddick, Chris Braswell, Anthony Nelson, and whatever else that position.
Yeah, and I think that listening to both of them, and especially Coach Bowles talk about, you would assume him being kind of the defensive-minded guy, that he'd really be pushing for a defensive-heavy draft. And we've been assuming it's going to potentially be a defensive-heavy draft based on need, but both he and Jason talked about this idea that it is about best available. We are not going to pass up someone that is an offensive player that, again, whether it's Hassan Reddick's edition or wherever we are, like, they want the best player available. They are not going to go defense for the sake of it. They're not going to go a certain position for the sake of it. And hearing Bowles really say that, especially too, and I loved how he put it. He's like, I can always find ways to stop people. He's like, I can mix and match and do what I need. But he's like, but if you don't got the guys on offense, you're going to struggle.
Or
if one of them goes down.
Call them horses.
Yes, and so I thought that was really interesting to just hear the way that both of them talked about it. Like, we're up for anything.
Well, the way the question was presented to Todd was, you're a defensive coach. Are you excited about this probably being a high defense draft? And he goes, you know what? As a defensive coach, I have learned that the way you win games is scoring a lot of points. So he's like you said, I can work around the edges on defense, but you can't make up for not having the horses there.
Yeah, which I think is really interesting. And then also, I know, Bri, he talked about the quotes he had on the 40-yard dash and evaluating corners, and also about Yaya Diaby.
Yeah. So I've always found it interesting when you have the GM or you have the coach talk about the metrics and the testing. And I loved, they were asked a lot about it at the Combine too. And Todd was very adamant that, they look at the tape first and then you use the numbers to kind of solidify what you see. Or if you have a guy that tests just out of this world, takes the lid off Lucas Oil, well, then you go back to the tape and see if it matches up. But I love what he said about corners, that there are certain position groups that the 40-yard dash is more imperative, and that corner is one of those that's very critical. You have to have a guy that can stay with those vertical threats, can stay with a guy on that fade ball. But if you have a team that, plays a lot of zone, plays more cover too, like, you might necessarily not need as much of the speed. And he said, of course, they look at the short area quickness, they look at the ball skills, they look if he's a willing tackler, and look at all those things. but the 40 is critical when evaluating corners. And just look at a guy like Maxwell Harrison that ran a 4.2, and he's a guy that's really rising on mocks recently. He was in a lot of first in this latest mock that I did. And then I loved when he was talking about Yaya Diaby. He talked a lot about in the first year, Yaya was kind of just wanting to run over guys, was using the power, was using the force. And then in year 2, he really kind of, the mental part clicked for Yaya, and he was using more of a tactical approach and finding more ways and understanding ways that blockers were wanting to attack him. So I think you're going to see a big leap from him this year. And maybe the sack numbers weren't there for him, but he was still getting the pressures, and he was still affecting the quarterback and moving him off of his spot or making him throw quicker. So
yeah,
I thought overall he had a really big year despite what the stats may have shown.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to
Also,
see.
Todd Bowles said he hopes that Chris Godwin will be ready for week 1.
Yep, which...
I mean, hopes isn't the same thing as knowing,
Yeah.
but I don't think you would say that if you didn't really think it was a possibility.
Yeah, and I think he said Bryce Hall seems to be running full speed. He obviously got hurt a lot
Earlier,
sooner, right?
yeah.
But running full speed, he's excited about that as well. So it was cool to hear injury updates
Yeah,
on
we'll
both
see
of
what
those
happens
guys.
when we start the offseason programs this month.
Man, that is this month. That is wild. All right, well, that's going to do it for us on this edition of Bucs Insider. Thanks so much for being with us. We'll see you next week.